Born out of the need to educate. That's the motto of the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors. So who are the Party Wall Surveyors, the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors? What is their history, their role and aims? Well, here to speak to me about it today is the President of the Faculty, Alex Frame. Alex Frame, welcome. As I said, Alex is the President of the Faculty. He's also a Chartered Building Surveyor and has his own architectural and building consultancy practice in West Berks. Alex, you were one of the original founders of the faculty, and I wonder if you let us know when the faculty was formed and why you felt it was necessary to establish such an organisation.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, good morning to you. Yes, it goes back quite a while when we started. I was one of the original 4 founder members of the faculty. I was practicing in party wall matters in the London Building Acts of 1939, which we affectionately call the 39 Act. But I was a surveyor member with the ASI, which is the Architects and Surveyors Institute, and there was a section in there that dealt with party walls. We had a number of members, about quite a few number, 500 members, something like that, that dealt with party wall work. And then what happened was that the Chartered Institute of Builders, the CIOB, they took over the ASI, which was good in some ways. I then spoke to the president of the CIOB at the time and I said, look, we have a section in our ASI that you've taken over that deals with party walls. Will you be doing that in the CIOB? He said, no, we're not interested in that at all, which was a bit of a sad thing to hear from them. So as a result of that, we were taken over by CIOB. So what should we do? So this is how we formed the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors, and there was 4 of us. I'm the remaining one of the other 3 that are not with us, that they've retired and from there. And we built up from there and did seminars and so on. So the problem in those days was that there was no education on faculty on party wall work rather, and so that was our aim, as you said at the beginning. It was born out of education.
Thank you. And it's obviously quite a task. So how did you go about structuring the faculty?
Structuring the faculty, well, there was originally 4 of us, as I said. And so we produced seminar teachings to round up surveyors who were party wall surveyors in the old ASI. To come along and to come and join us, and we held interviews and so on. But what we thought was, as I've mentioned already, what was important to us was the education because under the 39 Act, where in London that we were all working from, there was no education. There was nothing. We just sort of opened the book and we carried on. And gosh, we made many mistakes, I can assure you. And I thought, well, this can't be right. And because when the 96 Act came along, we thought, well, look, we've got to get in at the beginning and start to educate, and so that we have good surveyors, that will practice well for the general public.
Well, I can see it as one of the major challenges. Was the Act, the 1939 Act you referred to, applied just to inner London, and now all of a sudden it's going nationwide throughout England and Wales. So there clearly wasn't enough surveyors around, or surveyors that had working experience in dealing with the Act. So that in itself brought about the need for this education. And I see that the faculty runs a advice and helpline. Could you describe to our viewers as to how that's run?
It's very active. It's a telephone advice line that we run from. We now have offices with administration girls in there that they run. We get calls from both surveyors and from the general public. And the advice is free for as long as it needs to be to help them. What do I need to do? What notice do I need to serve? What is the Party Wall Act? Who do I go to? Where do I find a surveyor? I have a problem. What do I do here? And so that's our advice line. And we built up from there, and we still run it today. Very much we run it today. And I think we get something like 15 to 20 calls a week quite easily and we have a panel of expert party wall surveyors who answer and help the inquirers. So yes, it works very well.
And on the faculty's website, there is reference, and we've already hit upon it, education. Would you be able to describe to us how that is provided and in terms of both public and members? You mentioned earlier forums, and you've talked about the advice line. But could you just give a little bit more detail about the educational side of it? I believe the faculty has an education department, doesn't it? It's a bespoke department.
The board has currently seven directors on the board, and each one of them have got different jobs to do. One looks after promotion and marketing, one looks after administration, one looks after membership, and various aspects like that. And we have one of our directors looks after setting up forums, which is a gathering together of surveyors for meetings in the evenings for invite speakers. So there's education from that point of view for existing surveyors. And of course, we have 2-day seminars, which are very important. If you want to be a member of the faculty, you have to come in and join in on the 2-day seminars, where we educate people to become surveyors and to become members of the faculty, right from the beginning of the Act right the way through to the end, and illustrations and so on. In fact, on the afternoon of the second day, we give them a paper exercise so that they can put into practice what we have actually taught them in the day and a half. So they can, without going there and jumping at the deep end, they're given some drawings to look at. Pretty simple one. But it's all part of the education to make them better surveyors for the surveyors that we want. They may have been practicing for some time, but believe you me, they haven't been practicing well. They've been doing it wrong. So that's why we insist that joining the factory, we all want to sing from the same hymn sheet, as the cliche goes. If we educate all the surveyors at the same level, then we think we're on a winning line.
Do you find that these on these one-to-one 2-day courses, there's a significant variation in knowledge and abilities from the participants in that course? And if so, how is that addressed?
Yes, we do get a cross variation of people. We're from the novices who actually do career changes. They want to, they've heard about this, and we've had different people coming. We had teachers from schools. They're fed up with teaching children. They want to go and have a career change into party wall work. We have builders themselves, bricklayers and carpenters sitting in as well, because they're dealing with it at ground level, so to speak, and they hit a problem, and it's they're building an extension, for example, to keep it residential, and they hit a problem with the neighbours complaining about what you're doing, and there's a Party Wall Act, and what is this? So they come in, they want a knowledge and an education on party wall work as well. And of course, we have other people come in, the owners themselves, who want to know, well, what is this act? What do I need to do? And how do I do it? And how do I get a surveyor, and so on? So there's a cross, a patch of people that we educate about the Act.
It's good, and I guess the 2-day course is a starting point for many people. Others, it may be a revision, we all have that problem, don't we? We come across the professional who says, I've been doing this for 30 years,
yes.
And he or she may well have been doing it for 30 years, but maybe one bad year times 30. And I think it sounds to me that the 2-day course is an opportunity to iron out the wrinkles there, maybe of established practitioners.
Well, that was one of the problems that we had when we were all working from the affectionately known as the 39 Act that I referred to. That there was no education then, and we just followed what our peers did, and what our seniors did, and this is how we do it, son, and we work along that way. And funny enough, I had one sort of chap who said, I said, well, we can't do this. The clause that you're writing in the award is incorrect. It's not in accordance with the Act, and so on. and he was a bit disgruntled and wasn't happy about that, and said, well, I've been doing this for 25 years. Don't tell me, my boy. It was that kind of attitude. And I said, well, yeah, I'm sorry, but you've obviously been doing it wrong for 25 years. So that didn't go down very well either. So it's important to have the education on the Act. It's amazing how many mistakes were made under the previous 39 Act. I can actually, in all honesty, look back when I was working under the 39 Act from London, and I've got some of the old awards that I did, and I look and I think, goodness me, how did I get away with that? It was awful, but there we are.
Yeah, I think that's symptomatic, isn't it? I think I too am old enough to have worked in the 1939 Act, and I don't think we were challenged enough, were we? And obviously, since this piece of legislation has gone nationwide since 1996, it has put us on our guard, and getting back to the need to educate. It never stops, does it, really? It's this philosophy of continual education. And as you've already described, education comes about in many formats, and you are a prolific writer in education. And you brought along some books today. I think if you just hold each one up in turn, we'll have a brief look about it. But I think the good starting point is the book that is actually given to all the participants on this foundation 2-day course. That's the Misunderstandings and Guidance book, isn't it? Which is that one.
That's that one, Stephen, that you're talking about. And I wrote this because it came about from writing some articles on various magazines and so on, that people were writing things about the Act, and no, that's wrong. That's a misunderstanding. And so hence I called the book The Misunderstandings and Guidance, and I cover the whole of all the sections in the Act in this book. So this is for surveyors themselves, but even when we're training on the 2-day seminars, they are given one of these books to learn and to study from. So it's a good, so again, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet again.
And I see you're on the 4th edition, and that's indicative of what would you say? Is it more than one reason why?
Yes, it's not because of mistakes in the book. I'll quickly add. It usually comes about because of case laws that come up. We're very up into the knowledge of various cases that appear in courts, and certain cases come up which are good because in the Act, we have some sort of grey areas, what we might call grey areas. We don't know, well, should it be this, should it be that? We have it, and someone challenges it in court in an award, and we get a judgment from the judge, and he says, no, this is it. So it changes the grey areas into black and white. And as a result, I think, oh, gosh, we were thinking wrong in that, and so hence, the 4th edition covers up-to-date case laws, and it will continue to do so, as various cases come up.
What I particularly like about the book is that there's bullet point summaries at the end of each chapter, which is a very good way to revise, isn't it? And I'll be speaking to another colleague, another podcast in this series about the interview that people will attend after actually taking part in this 2-day course. But it's the logic of providing that book as to enhance what they're being taught in the 2-day course is perfectly good to me. And also that 4th edition has now introduced some drawings, isn't it, and sketches it's very much a case of a picture painting 1,000 words, isn't it?
It is. The book has developed, from the first one to the 4th edition. I did write a book on construction, which I've got with me. I can show you in a minute, perhaps. But I thought what I would do is to incorporate the drawings that I did for the construction and put it into this 4th edition. So there's a picture language to help the surveyors and the new learners to understand what I'm actually talking about. Because reading is something is one thing, but as we say, a picture, paints 1,000 words, doesn't it? So if you've got a drawing of it, so I've included a lot of construction drawings in that 4th edition, and people have said it's been very, very useful. Yeah.
Good. And the second book, I'd like you just to tell us about, is the one on the third surveyor, which is now on its 2nd edition, isn't it?
It is.
You could just briefly, for the benefit of lay people watching this, what a third surveyor is and why you felt the need to produce this book.
Well, there were lots of there were quite a few articles and books written on the Party Wall Act itself and so on. but there isn't any. There's only one that I know of, actually. I may be wrong, but that's why I wrote this book. This is specifically for third surveyors. Now, a third surveyor comes into his own when you have the owners each appoint their own surveyor. So you have two surveyors, and because you have two surveyors, you have a quasi-adjudicator in the background to make up the tribunal, and he is the third surveyor. Now, the third surveyor, he would be a far more experienced surveyor. He'd been doing it for some years and have good knowledge. And so this particular book deals with a bit more of case laws and how to understand it, how to write a third surveyor's award. And so it goes into a greater depth than the ordinary other book on construction and the Act itself. So this is for more learned surveyors.
And as with misunderstandings and guidance supplementing the 2-day course, does that third surveyor book actually supplement a third surveyor course as well?
It goes alongside it, because we say, again, if you want to be in the faculty practicing as a third surveyor, you have to do the 1-day course. We do a 1-day course. And in that course, it highlights the case laws and how they came about, why they came about, how they can use them when they write reports, because there's nothing better than when a third surveyor writes an award, writes a report and so on, that he can back it up with case laws that, Judge so-and-so said this, Judge so-and-so said that, and it supports his argument and supports his case. The same thing that happens with lawyers in courts, with barristers and judges. They're referring to old case laws because, as English law is based on precedents and not based on Roman law like they have in Scotland.
And I think when you were doing the writing the first edition, you were trying to find if there was any other book on the third surveyor, and I think there was some remote book, wasn't there?
There was one that I found. It was a bit thin, didn't really tell us a great deal, and a few little articles on it, but no real guidance on a third surveyor, which is quite astonishing, really. I mean, they're the very people that do need some help as to how to put them. If you're a third surveyor and you're called upon to determine a particular matter that is a conflict between either the owners or either the surveyors, because under the Act, under Section 1011 of the Act, either of those 4 people can call upon the third surveyor to adjudicate on a matter. Now, if you are a third surveyor and you're called to adjudicate on a matter, then how are you going to deal with it? And there was no learning, there was no teaching, on that education. So hence me writing the book on it. Having done, I did my first award in 1970, Stephen. It's a long time ago.
That's a thought, isn't it? But it certainly has filled a gap, and the profession is very grateful to you for that. But that's us focusing on party wall surveyors and guidance offered through books. But you've also written a guidance for the public, haven't you? There, and that's this particular book.
This is what I call the easy guide.
Yes.
And this has got lots of drawings in here, and this is what we also give these away at the seminars for the 2-day courses as well, because some people in the seminars, they may be complete novices or in there for career change, that kind of thing, as I said earlier on. But very often when I go, and we encourage other surveyors to buy a lot of these from us, that they're a few pounds. But to actually, when they meet their appointing owners on site or in their houses or whatever, they're told to give these in. We actually give them away to the general public so that they can read it themselves. Because otherwise, you could be sitting there for hours, explaining what the Act is and what it is. So you can do that, of course. But wouldn't it be nice that if someone gives you, here we are, Mrs. Jones. Here's an easy guide. You can have a look at this. Bit of bedtime reading for you, but it explains the Act, for you, and it works. And it works.
Yeah, I can vouch for that because it is the case, isn't it, when we're dealing with lay public, and it's presumptuous of us to think that they will immediately grasp something that's taken a significant amount of time to train a professional. And therefore, how can we reasonably expect a layperson to understand the nuances of the Act? And there is a significant amount of time taken at the beginning of receiving an appointment as a surveyor, isn't it? Whether you're representing the person that's undertaking the work, or you're looking after the person living next door. And so providing them with that book and then cross-referencing it in a telephone conversation or an email, saying, well, backing up what I've just told you today, look at page 66 or something like that. And again, I believe that's filled a necessary gap. And it's all about this continual aim of the faculty to educate, isn't it? And it's lovely to see that we're not just insular, we're not just focusing on surveyors or potential surveyors, we're talking about members of the public. And I feel that does save an awful lot of time when we're trying to put over to these poor people that got major construction works taking place next door as to how their rights will be protected. So that's good. So we've got another one there, I think, this is the history.
Yeah.
And I know you're a great historian as well as many other things, a true polymath. But history of party walls, Alex, this was a particularly, along with a similar one there, but this was of particular passion of yours, wasn't it?
Yes, well, my history goes back to probably to Roman times, actually, although I'm not that old myself, or I might look at the time. I wanted to know a bit more about how we got the Party Wall Act. A lot of people think that the Party Wall Act came about through the Great Fire of London, for example, and all came. But no, it goes back far, far earlier than that. It goes back to Richard I, the Lionheart, the Coeur de Lion. She put together some various arguments between people over matters that they couldn't agree upon, and there was lots of different. That was all brought together in 1400 by the Lord Mayor of London, which is Dick Whittington, the Ladybird book with the cat. We don't know that the cat was quite there, but he brought together a lot of these problems that neighbours had with, party walls and arguments and boundaries and that sort of thing. And then, of course, we have the Great Fire of London that brought about when Christopher Wren was around at the time. And King Charles II, not the first because he had his head chopped off, the first, King Charles II brought about an act for rebuilding London, basically. And Christopher Wren was involved. Christopher Wren had this idea that, well, we've lost a lot of London, why don't we demolish the rest of it and we can rebuild it in a rectilinear form, based on the gardens of Versailles. And the king says, well, no, look, you just stick to churches and we'll deal with our chaps, will deal with the rebuilding of London. As a result, one of the major things that came out of the rebuilding of houses in London, Stephen, was the, you know yourself and other people will know that the residential buildings were timber frame and thatch roofs and that sort of thing. And obviously, very combustible materials, wasn't it? And hence we had the Great Fire. And of course, the houses were built very, very close to each other. The first floors of each house were jettied. So in other words, they overhang, to gain extra space. And the lanes were very narrow. So you could almost open your window, well, if you had an opening in that first floor rather than a window as such, and you could shake hands with the person across the road, because they were that close. So hence the fire was very easy to spread. So when they put this the act together for rebuilding of London, said, well, obviously we can't have that happening again. We can still build with timber frame houses, but the one thing that came out of this was that they said that all party walls had to be of masonry construction. They had to be brickwork and blockwork and built. And further that, what I call the London houses, is that the wall had to continue through the roof to about 18 inches to form a parapet. Now, you don't see that in a lot of other cities and towns up and down the country. And that, if you look at houses in London, you'll find that's where you get lots of parapet walls. And that's the reason. It's come from, those new building laws that came about at the time. The party wall had to be masonry and it had to go right the way through the roof. So even though you had thatch on either side, you wouldn't get one building burning against his neighbour.
Well, I'm sure that the value of the history of party walls puts everything into context. Why are we doing things as we are today? Why are there parapets? Why are we having to deal with a parapet if we're raising it to actually build a loft conversion? But did you discover when you were researching for that book that the Act was copied or adopted in other cities at all?
Not at the time. That only came about from the 96 Act, which we have. But previous to that, see, London always had its own constructional bylaws and so on, whereas the rest of the country had its own model bylaws of villages and towns and so on. Some of the bigger places like Bristol, Liverpool, Manchester, they had more detailed in construction and so on. And it wasn't until the 1965 building regulations came out that we had a nationalisation of construction, but that still didn't incorporate the Party Wall Act. And London was still practicing, it had to adopt the national regulations of 65, and then went on to 1985, the Party Wall Act, that was still a separate entity. And then it came about. It takes a long time to go through Parliament and change things and so on. So hence from 85 up until 96, we had the Party Wall Act, which was a bill through Parliament that John Lytton, the Earl of Lytton, put through it very quickly in a day. And that covered the whole of England and Wales, which you said at the beginning. It now covers the whole of England and Wales, the Party Wall Act. And the difficulty then arose that the people outside of London, you know, in all, even the big cities and so on, knew nothing about the Party Wall Act. So hence our great need for education and to help all those surveyors outside of London who were not familiar with the Party Wall Act, that we could help and to teach them, because look, the Party Wall Act now covers the whole of England and Wales, and we want to help you to understand it and to be good surveyors, to deal with it.
And arising out of that history, I suppose, is also explaining really to professionals, existing professionals, those that want to come into the profession, and also lay members as well, lay members of the public, is why are surveyors given such incredible powers? They're almost, as you used the phrase earlier, quasi appearing to be. I think that means you're a scholar of Latin as well, aren't you? I think that's what it means.
Yes.
Why are surveyors given such powers? I mean, they are producing something called a Party Wall Award, a legal document, aren't they? But I suppose a long-winded question, Alex. But I suppose it's a case that you've got these individuals that are experts in construction, have the right amount of knowledge of the law to actually combine it and to keep people out of court, isn't that really? You know, surveyors are still cheaper than lawyers, aren't they?
Well, some of the surveyors I meet, they're not so cheap as lawyers. The purpose of the Act was to bypass the litigation that lawyers obviously love, and that's their core earnings, as it were. But as a party wall surveyor, you don't have a client. You see, you can be an architect, you can do some plans and drawings for someone, you can be a structural engineer and do some design and concrete work, you can be all sorts of other people in the construction industry. But in the Party Wall Act, as a surveyor, you are appointed statutorily. You are statutorily appointed. So you don't have a client as such. So your duty is to administer and implement the Act. Now, sometimes that creates a little bit of problems for some owners when they think, well, I'm paying you and I want you to do this and I want you to do that. But I'm sorry, but I can only work from what the Act allows me to do. I'm not here to do your bidding. And what happens sometimes that the owners get a little bit upset and they say, I don't like what you're doing. I'm going to sack you. And the point is, Stephen, is that you can't be sacked. Now, I wonder, how many people know of a job that you can't be sacked from? Because as a party wall surveyor, you are appointed by statute, and it's in writing, of course. Everything has to be in writing, and the Act says that any appointments, selections, and appointments have to be in writing, and it shall not be rescinded. So there are. You can sack yourself, of course, if you don't like, how it's going, but you can't be sacked yourself because you don't have a client. Unlike if an architect don't like what your architect is doing for you, you can sack him, and get somebody else. But you can't do that with a party wall surveyor.
And that's mentioned in your guidance, misunderstanding guidance, isn't it? Also that guide to the public, the Easy Guide,
yes,
which is good. And it is a concept which is difficult, isn't it, for lay people to understand. Again, But it is going back to that quasi-judicial role. It's like a judge, I suppose, isn't it? You wouldn't expect a judge to be a judge will not take one person's side. He or she is there to look at to establish the rights of someone to do works, and on the other side of the coin, they're there to consider how those works are going to affect next door, and consider how those works can be done in a way to mitigate the risk of damage and unnecessary inconvenience. And what I loved about the history of party walls is how, you're giving it context, how we got into this position here. And another history book you produced, Alex, was on the history of walls, wasn't it?
Yes, the Walls of History, which is quite thick.
Yes.
I was quite amazed as to going up and down the country at various cities and towns and villages and things that are not there. Because remember, the Romans were here for quite a few hundred years, weren't they? And they left behind all sorts of things that we've dug up. And I discovered there's all sorts of Roman remains all over the country. And I thought, and they're all about walls. I've got this crazy thing about walls. So I've did a study on these walls of history throughout the whole country. Quite amazing what I found. So that's why the book is quite thick on walls of history.
So you did...
These are not necessarily party walls, walls,
right,
but they're general walls of construction and so on that we've found, from Roman times and even going back before then. So I thought, that's interesting. So I've got a whole book on various towns, and you can go to see today of the remains of what's left. So hence the walls of history.
But I think it was those very walls, wasn't it, Alex, that confined cities within relatively small areas and condensed the buildings within those walls. They were up against each other, on top of one another. And hence, that is what the Party Wall Act is all about, isn't it? It's recognising the difficulty of someone either repairing a wall or developing their property within those confined areas where you're going to have an effect. So highly relevant, again, I believe, you're giving context there as all our cities were surrounded by walls. Even London was before, and York before the Victorians demolished them all to build access for railways and general access in and out. And obviously security of individual cities was no longer an issue in this country. But again, for those that are thinking, well, why should I be reading a book about the walls that surrounded these cities? It has context, and it can see why we were all, through paranoia of being invaded, from being attacked, that we secured ourselves within these confined spaces. Because I was interested about Norwich. He was, in the 17th century, you talked about Rennes. It was London. It was the second city of England, wasn't it?
Indeed.
And surrounded by walls again. But yes, I must admit, I'm a fellow anorak when it comes to walls, and it has its place. But you've got another book for us there, Alex. That's the one on boundary disputes.
Boundary disputes. I wrote this. I deal with boundary disputes. I was on one yesterday, actually, and up and down the country, when people, owners argued about where the boundary is, who owns the fence and the wall. That's mine. I built it, and here's my original deeds, and so on. Unfortunately, with boundaries, there is no act of Parliament that deals with boundaries in this country. It's different in Europe, but they have a different system. It's a cadastral system, where everything is marked out in nice little straight lines. We don't have that in England. We're on ditches and hedges and things like that, you see. They use the cadastral system in America, in the United States.
What is that term again, Alex?
It's cadastral.
What does that mean exactly then?
Building up straight lines, basically.
Right.
Yeah. And you can see evidence of them where brass pins are in the floor. So if you lost one of those brass pins or markings,
right,
it didn't matter, because you knew it was always going to be at right angles and straight lines and so on. If you look at the map of America, the United States of America, you'll find that there are a lot of squares, isn't there? A lot of straight lines and so on. I talk about that in the book, because they use that system, so that you know exactly where the boundary is. It's there, it's there, it's there, it's there. That's the sort of thing. But boundaries, why I wrote this one was because it pops up quite often in party wall work, because surveyors will go to site, they'll deal with a notice under the Act, and then they discover when they get on site that there's an argument between the owners of where the boundary is. And the poor surveyor says, gosh, I don't know where the boundary is. I think it's here, but or sometimes it's quite easy to determine where the boundary is, but not always, not always, because it doesn't always spring from the centre line of a party wall. It may be offset and so on. And so you're digging up evidence. So it's difficult for the surveyors. So it would be an extra string to the bow, if I can put it that way, for surveyors to have the knowledge about boundaries so that when they do go to site, they can help to determine and help to solve the problem that owners have. And I've done it many times. So, well, okay, you don't know where it is, but if we look at this, we take some measurements, and here's various things we look at, lots of things, and actually, but we can help them to determine where the boundary is. It's not within the Party Wall Act, of course, but it's an extra help that you can give to the owners.
I guess it's knowing the limitations of the jurisdiction of a party wall surveyor, isn't it? That
yes.
Although they can't actually determine a boundary, and as you say, only the courts can do that, can't they? It's knowing that their limitations and where to go, isn't it? Where to go and who to consult, really. And there's nothing like boundaries to get people appearing in court, is there, unfortunately? And
well, this is the lesson that people learn the hard way, I have to say, Stephen, sadly, with boundaries. My son was a barrister. He used to deal with it as well, and dealing with owners arguing about boundaries and where they are and so on. People will have this attitude of, oh, it's a question of principle. They may be arguing about a small piece of land, sort of 6-9 inches less, sometimes, just a couple of inches. Does it really matter? Oh yes, it's principle, they get very worked up about. And my son Stuart used to say, well, what is your principle worth? 10,000, 20,000, 50,000? I've dealt with some boundary disputes up to 100,000 quite easily,
And over a small amount of land?
Over a small amount of land, and quite often they get to the stage of the owners, they're arguing about it, and they say, well, gosh, I'm spending a lot of legal money here. The lawyers love it, of course, but they are. But they said, oh, we'll give up. Well, they give up, but they've got all those legal fees to pay. I did one locally in a village near me. My client got up to £80,000 in lawyers' fees. The other side got up to 95, something like that. And they decided to call it a day. And they were only arguing about a strip of little flower bed at the front of their house between the two of them. And that's all it was about.
Oh dear. Is the boundary book you got there, is it something also for the lay public, or is it for professionals?
Both.
Oh, good.
Both.
To avoid, for them to consider and reflect on whether they should be going to court over a few inches of land is one thing. And we got Daniel Ross in this series. He's going to be talking to us about the courses the faculty do. Okay. And there is a boundary course that's run, isn't there, by the faculty, to supplement the knowledge again and the education. Yeah. And we got the final book there you brought. I'm pretty sure it's not every book you've read today, but I think there was a limit to how much you could bring with you today, wasn't there?
There is, yeah.
And yes, you take us through this one, extending your home.
Well, this was to provide some construction knowledge right from the beginning to help people. This is really from a residential point of view, people building extensions or building houses and so on. But it's construction related, obviously, to party wall work and so on. So having a good knowledge of construction, because I go from the beginning, right from obtaining and making applications for planning, applications for building regulations and all other things that pop up when you need to know about when you're doing building work. And then I go into various types of construction, how they're put together, what you need to do, and so on. So again, it's a help and it's a guide. Now, some of these drawings in here I've actually put into the Misunderstandings book, so there's a crossover there. But this is really, it's a bit more because it goes from the beginning to the end of a book about extending. Now, there's lots of books on the market on these, of course, I understand that, lots and lots of books. But this is kind of more helpful for the party wall surveyor, to have the construction knowledge of, and the general public when they've got this as well. Yeah.
And providing some context again, isn't it, like your books do. We're not working in isolation as party wall surveyors, which is encouraging. But conscious that we're heading towards about 5 or 6 minutes of this podcast, and I'm going to ask for sort of relatively short answers, if that's possible. And so, how does the faculty maintain standards amongst their membership?
Very good question, Stephen. We are very robust with that. We are a limited company. but we have a handbook which is quite thick that every member has to sign up for, which covers the bylaws. One of the important things in the book is the code of conduct, and we pretty strictly keep to that code of conduct, which they expect our members to adhere to, and if not, then we have a section that deals with disciplinary matters. And I think that's important, because we do find not necessarily our members, but some of our members have to deal with other surveyors who, what I affectionately call rogue surveyors, may I use that term, who are abusing the Act and taking advantage of people because they know that they can't be sacked, because they're appointed under statute. And charging enormous fees and so on, which we find quite distasteful. So we've got things like that covers things in our code of practice that we expect our surveyors to be good surveyors, to give a good service. You will earn quite well in this profession. Undoubtedly you will. But as I say to many surveyors, you can earn well, but please don't be greedy. And if you don't follow our code of conduct and our bylaws and so on, then I'm sorry, but we're going to have a little word with you. And we have had 2 or 3 out of we've got about 1,000 members at the moment, built up from over 20 years. We've had 2 or 3 that we need to bring into line.
And this disciplinary panel we refer to, is it made up of surveyors and or lawyers?
It's a mixture of both. It's experienced surveyors, and particularly lawyers. We do have barristers who are there to set the standards and to interpret the bylaws, to interpret the code of conduct, have they adhere to it, and so on. And sometimes it's no more than a reprimand and a smack on the knuckles, as it were. But otherwise, sometimes it can be a bit more serious. But, thank the Lord, we don't get many of those. Yeah. But we do have that in train. It's there. So
thank you, Alex. And finally, then, I've given you 3 minutes, Alex, to say what are your visions for the faculty's future?
In 3 minutes would be hard for me to sum up, Stephen. But the faculty is to continue with the education. That's what's most important to me. When we first set this up, people scoffed at us, to be honest, and they said, "Oh, you're jumping on the bandwagon of the '96 Act. You're just there to make money and so on." That has never been my philosophy, never been my aim at all. My aim is to produce good and good, intelligent, good surveyors, to help the general public. And that sounds very kind of pious and so on, but it's a genuine thing. So I want to develop that and make sure that we do get good surveyors, particularly as members of our faculty.
Thank you, Alex. And so from this particular podcast, one of 6 in this series, I hope that you, as either a potential surveyor for the future or an existing practitioner, or even a member of the public, will see what the aims are of the faculty, a legacy that's been produced by Alex Frame and his colleagues, and that you will see that the faculty is not only looking to engage, but encouraging you to engage with this very reputable institution. Thank you for listening.